The year is 2121. There are no new ideas. There hasn't been a Marvel film in generations, but even that's not enough to save the integrity of a dying media industry. The lone survivor of Entertainment Weekly hits publish on their first article in 6 months. The CW network announces The Vampire Diaries reboot. Here are the tapes. Welcome to the Vampire Diaries writing room. Hello, Flo.
Hey Ingrid, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. No rain yet. Just the fear of it.
Hopefully, there won't be any thunderstorms to mess up our recording.
Yeah.
Let's start with our first pitch of the week. We're going to talk about characters. And the best thing to do would be to start with the unholy trinity, Elena, Stefan, and Damon, right? Uh, we have a lot of ideas on how to make them more interesting and work better in this new context for the Vampire Diaries that we are creating. So let's start with Elena. What do you think of Elena, Flo? Like the way she is in TVD when it released in 2009?
Well, I actually didn't watch it in 2009. Super embarrassing because we'll probably keep talking about 2009 as this golden year where it all started. But I think I binge watched the first three seasons in 2012 or so. And at the time, I was totally in that phase of you don't really like any main characters because the story kind of tells you to like them and you think you're a bit more alternative and interesting than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I disliked Elena a lot for some reasons that I probably still don't enjoy, but and for others that were just totally my 14-year-old damage, I guess. I like her more on rewatches. I think that she has a lot of potential, but yeah, I don't love that she's on the back foot so much. And I don't want to criticize her being a good person too much, but she doesn't. A lot of things just happen around her coincidentally, and there's like a lot of the drama comes from other places. It's just kind of imported into her life, and I don't feel like she like fully, especially in the beginning, it's quite frustrating. She doesn't have a lot of agency, I suppose.
Yeah, I think my main issue with Elena is that to make her seem more relatable to the viewer and to make her likable, they really made her kind of devoid of any flaws or interesting personality traits. Like, besides the idea that, oh, she's the heroine, so her main flaw is that she cares way too much about her loved ones and doesn't really care much about her own well being. That's like the typical, like, hero heroine thing. But besides that, she's a very, like, flat character. And they really make her less dynamic and interesting based on her counterpart in the novels by L.J. Smith, because her personality, Elena, in the books is way more similar to Caroline when she first started out.
Agreed.
Like she was a bit more flawed. She was a bit more like the popular girl. She's a like I don't know if bitchy is the best way to word, but she
She
was
goes for Stefan, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's very Caroline.
yeah. So like we have Elena in the show who's just supposed to be the audience stand-in, and because of that, she is not as like interesting, I guess, as the other characters. And I think that sucks for being the protagonist because she's a very passive protagonist. Like things happen to her, but she doesn't really set anything in motion. So, for instance, an example from season one, because I rewatched season one recently and it's the one that's freshest in my mind, is that um, she found out about her resemblance to Catherine because she just found a picture of Catherine on a desk at the Salvatore house. Like, she didn't look for it. She wasn't interested in Stefan's past with this person who was so important to him. Like to this day, you can still see like the repercussions of their relationship. But she just didn't uh, try to figure that out on her own. But then, oh, she sees a picture. The picture resembles her, and like that's what causes the their conflict in the relationship. Like, if she had not seen the picture, that conflict just wouldn't have happened. So it's a very like um, random and inconsequential thing, I guess. Another example is where she finds out that she's adopted, but she doesn't really demonstrate much of a desire to, or like initiative to go after her birth mother. The one who goes after her for her is Jenna. Like Jenna bangs Isabel's name and ends up eventually finding her. So I think that to give her a bit more agency would be just her trying to find things out on her own, like being a little bit more of a detective. That's something that I would have
Mm,
preferred to see, at least in the first season.
mm. Yeah, I think it comes across as a little bit contrived if there are so many coincidences and other people putting things in motion to get Elena to a certain point emotionally for her to have like a big um, character moment or a big moment with Stefan. Like it just, yeah, I totally agree. It doesn't really work for me either.
Yeah, I think it would have been an opportunity to like have her have more screen time with Caroline and Bonnie, like because in this new version of the Vampire Diaries, Caroline would be studying journalism, and Bonnie is studying history, and she's finding things out about her own family history and her powers. So it could have been an opportunity for the three of them to discover things about themselves, about their town, about their families, about their heritage, and just have this
Mm.
opportunity for them to be like a trio of detectives, I guess. Because at least for me, the best parts of the show are when the three of them interact because their relationship is definitely the strongest. And I just would have wanted
Mm.
to see more of that. And I think that would have been an opportunity to have that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like um, there's a way to introduce one character to new characters in like and have it feel really organic and interesting, but sometimes with the interactions with Elena and the Salvatore brothers early on, it feels like their conversations, I mean, obviously because this is how story works, but their conversations exist to communicate something to the audience, whereas you can have more natural interactions with people that Elena has history with. It's
Hmm.
not trying to or if it does, it can do it more skillfully to tell people things. Like if you just come across some random guy on the side of the road and then suddenly start talking about something plot important, it's really obvious to the viewer that something is trying to be communicated to you. But in those interactions with Elena and Caroline and Bonnie, I think there's a lot of potential for um, even like hints at darker historical aspects of the town, to do with vampire deaths and that kind of thing, the kinds of things that they would be used to having lived there. And you can bring that about more organically and in a way that puts Elena in more control because she knows certain things about the way the town works already. Like, yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's a really good idea. And it works really well with their mages as well. So, nice one.
What about you? Do you have any like suggestions about what we should do with Elena? Like any way that she could be changed to be more dynamic, more interesting?
I think that some more issues in the first season in particular between her and driving cars because they kind of touch on it in the pilot from memory, and then halfway through the season she has another big car accident with Damon, and then eventually several seasons in, spoiler alert, eventually she drives off of Wickery Bridge herself, and I feel like that moment, well, not deliberately, but and ends up turning because of that. And I feel like that moment becomes more powerful if we load it up with her having issues with driving and being in cars early on. And we could even like touch on it as like all of a sudden she has to drive somewhere because she's in some kind of danger or she needs to get away from Stefan or something like that. And it really like creates this um, conflict where like she needs to do something but she feels trapped because she can't travel herself and she can't take herself somewhere. And I guess perhaps that even if we wanted to intentionally incorporate this idea that she doesn't have agency until she really tries to get it for herself and pursue it, I think it could work. Not that I want to suggest that people must overcome their trauma to have agency or achieve anything in particular. I just think that really driving home how much her parents' deaths have impacted her works a lot better because obviously she's so supposed to be so sad and like broken up about it, and I just feel like having been injured in a car accident personally, nobody died, but I was injured, it's pretty hard. Like, it's quite tough to then step back into that situation. And I personally identify a lot with that moment in the pilot where Bonnie's car spins out and Elena kind of panics. And I wish that they leaned into that a little more. So I think it would be cool if we did, because this also brings up questions of how does she travel to college? Is she staying there right now, or has she gone home to stay with Jeremy because their parents have died? How is she getting around, and does she have to call somebody to take her everywhere, which then forces other character interactions to happen? I just think there's potential if we wanted to carry that forward a little bit.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think it would like flesh her out a bit more to give her this um something to overcome, because like her main deal, like the main storyline surrounding Elena, besides the romantic one between Stefan and Damon, is her having to deal with her trauma and the survivor's guilt of having been through the accident that killed her parents. But in the original show, she's not really given an opportunity to overcome that survivor's guilt. Like, at no point does she realize, oh, like, yes, I do deserve to live. I do deserve to move on. I am comfortable enough with myself to value my own safety and well-being. And to the very end of the show, like, it's really hard for me to believe that Elena has internalized that. Like, how different is the Elena of the finale to the Elena of the pilot? Like,
Mm.
there's
I
like
would
a
say not
real,
very.
yeah, like, and
Mm.
she's the protagonist. Like, originally she was the main protagonist in later seasons, like, because of
Mm.
Nina Dobrev's departure, they kind of changed that up a bit, but we don't get to see her conclude that arc. There's no closure there. So I think that
Mm.
engaging more with the event that shaped her, that made her character what it is, like, would have been much more interesting to do. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely.
Yeah, I personally am a bit sick of just because the media is so saturated with them, characters who need to be in a position where they're willing to sacrifice themselves all the time in order to
Hmm.
maintain sympathy, like audience sympathy for them. I think that the kinds of stories where you really get like your heart in your throat and like terrified by danger and that kind of thing is when they're fighting really hard to survive, and it's difficult to summon up that feeling as a viewer for somebody who's kind of ready to die anytime that somebody suggests that that might be a solution.
Hmm.
It's just, yeah, it's why I think TVD's villains tend to be much more interesting, because it's not even that a good and decent person can't be an interesting character. It's that if we always know exactly what they're going to do and there's no shift and no change in that and there's no room for them to grow, then the only real growth that we will have on a show is a bad person getting to that point of an ideal, perfect individual who will die for someone else. And I think if we look at the kinds of endings that certain shows in this universe have had for specific characters, that is very much what the arc looks like. It's getting to that point where you'll die for somebody. And I don't think that that's necessarily like, I mean, it's obviously quite a radical act of love for another person, but it's not necessarily the ultimate for every single character. And if we start there with somebody in particular, then there's nowhere to go. So,
I definitely agree with what you say when it seems to be TVD's main way of showing character development, that a character started off as a total piece of shit, but then they gradually became a better person, and that solidified in the moment that they decided to sacrifice themselves for someone else. But Elena starts off like that. She is ready to like sacrifice herself at any instance because she feels guilty. She doesn't feel like she deserved to have survived in the place of her parents. And so, like, what do you do with a character who's already like, in the logic of the show, uh, morally perfect? I guess so. It would have been more interesting to
mm,
have her kind of do the reverse journey. Like, I sacrificed my life. I totally don't care about my well being, to someone who values their own life a bit more. That would have been cool.
mm.
Awesome.
I actually think I actually think the only time we get to see this from Elena is when she switches her humanity off, which is
Hmm.
very representational of how that technique was used to force conflict, and then you could walk it back very easily the second they turn the humanity back on. Like, no, she's back now. It's fine. We're like back to the status quo. Like, I think that that even represents that maybe, like, I don't want to be mean about people that wrote this 100 years ago, but I think that that kind of demonstrates that maybe they even knew that you need something to twist around and create interest with this character, because obviously her current her current emotional state is not going to do it. So let's use this thing that we already have in the lore.
Yeah, something that they had that could easily be reversed, which that's the thing. There's
Mm,
no permanent change. There's no real stakes when you have something like that. Like besides
mm,
the whole idea of characters being able to die and resurrect at any point. But the idea of the humanity switch kind of gives characters like a get out of jail free card where they do uh, horrible things or morally questionable things. But if they did it while their humanity was switched off, then all is forgiven as soon as their humanity comes back on. Like they have to deal with a little bit of guilt, but besides that, like there's um, no real consequences to that. And I think that's super contrived, I guess.
mm.
Like, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
You have to face consequences for your actions. Jesus.
Mm, yeah. Did you have anything else for Elaine? Oh no, actually, one of my points that I have written down kind of matches up with this whole sacrificing herself and um, type thing. In the books, I haven't gotten to this point in the books. I'm reading them currently, but I know from the wiki that I'm on every single day, all day, that she eventually dies and comes back as a guardian angel, or I think they just call it a guardian. And this is justified because she has like partial angel ancestry. We don't necessarily have to answer this question right now, but it might be interesting to incorporate some other ways to make Elena and her background interesting that aren't just like looping straight back. Like, I mean, do we want to go with the doppelganger situation? I suppose is my question, like summed up, or would we like to diversify that a little bit with some of the lore from the books, or even like our own ideas that we have that could introduce something more interesting? Like, what do you think?
I think that sounds cool. Like, um, I definitely keep the doppelganger angle because uh, the whole duality between her and Catherine really mirrors the whole thing between Damon and Stefan. I think that's something that's like
Yeah, good point.
one of the overarching themes of the show. But if we give her like something a little bit more like angelic background, I think that'd be super cool. Yeah, we'll definitely think about
It'd be
that.
funny if we just never mentioned angels, and then all of a sudden, when she dies and is supposedly coming back as a vampire, then she's just got wings suddenly.
Definitely. Which is very true to TVD style. Like, they will introduce another subsection of the supernatural world and supernatural creatures in one season. Like, oh, these exist now. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Did you have anything else to say about Elena?
No, for Elena, I'm good.
Mm.
Let's move on to Damon. Damon. God. So what are your ideas? What do you think of Damon?
I think we have mentioned that we both aren't real fans of the way he's written in the show. I haven't fully gotten into him in the books yet, so I can't speak to that. But in the show, I think that it's not that he can't do bad things or he shouldn't do bad things, because that's where growth comes in and like interesting conflict comes from. But obviously, doing things that aren't consensual, playing around with compulsion is not very fun. But I did like him quite a lot the first time that I watched it, which I think
Hmm.
speaks to how kind of frightening it is to me now as an adult to look back on the representation of a desirable guy, um, and how I received that and really enjoyed that. And I remember specifically that, like, all this, bearing in mind, this was just after I don't think I'd been diagnosed yet, but I had just become sick with chronic fatigue syndrome. So I'm lying in bed all day, every day, and I'm watching the Vampire Diaries. And then I'm watching on YouTube compilations of Damon Salvatore on the Vampire Diaries. And while I'm not personally scarred for life, that's probably more to do with just
Oh
other
wow.
relationships that I've had since then, and not just that it's very normal to be super into a weird rapey dude on a CW TV show. I think it's quite alarming and a bit gross. And I know that you agree, but do you have any other thoughts? Like, what did you think of him when you first watched it?
Um, like I don't know. I do if it's just me, my like I have a bias against Ian Somerhalder's face. I don't know. I never thought of him as like charming or anything. I just thought he was kind of infuriating. But I can definitely understand that he is the character who is written to be the one that the audience would gravitate a bit more at too, because like he gets more to do in the story. Like he has the most interesting lines. Like he gets all those funny one-liners. And Ian Somerhalder isn't a bad actor. Like he delivers those one-liners like with total conviction, and I
Mm,
can respect that.
yeah.
But he's definitely like if we think about of the main audience, like the primary audience being heterosexual teenage girls, obviously the heterosexual teenage girls would kind of gravitate a bit more towards the mysterious, brooding one.
Mm,
Well, Stefan broods, and he is mysterious,
mm,
but I guess they would gravitate towards the one who's just a bit more
mm. A bit
uh,
darker.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit
Fun is
darker, a bit
true.
more
Fun is
like,
probably more accurate.
yeah.
I think Damon is kind of used as the reason that Stefan is a good person. He's kind of used as the measure
Hmm.
for Stefan's behavior, which I do think that doing that on purpose will naturally make the person who's supposed to look good look boring instead, because what
Hmm.
you're then having like the viewer's perception of this character is based on how another character is behaving, not based on the actual like actions and like worldview of the character, which is a bit annoying. Like what is Stefan without Damon to define him? I suppose that's one of the central questions of the show, but it doesn't really help Stefan as a character to constantly be shown up by his older brother. Um, yeah, but I do also agree about Ian Somerhalder's acting. Like he brought everything to that role and gave it everything, and it kind of breaks my heart to know that it was.
He did.
Oh, I don't like it very much. Probably for reasons outside of his control. Yeah. Okay, so do you
Yeah,
have?
like respect to. Oh, sorry.
No.
Go.
You go. You go.
No, I was just gonna say, like I said that I have a bias against Ian Somerhalder's face, but like total respect to you, dude. If you're listening, I think your face is fine. I'm sorry. Your face is fine, dude. Don't worry about it. I'm just more of a Stefan fan, I guess. Stefan's got the hair, and that's why.
Yeah, it's the hair. I mean, Damon has hair too, but it's kind of just there. It's not the starring role, is it? I think it's the eye
No,
thing is
absolutely
his
not.
starring feature. He does it like 10 times an episode. The like eye widening, like
Oh my goodness. Like the eyebrows and the big bulging eyes. I'm like, dude, calm down.
it's somebody just like tugged on a string that they have attached to Ian Somerhalder. That's what that face is. Uh,
Why did this turn into like listing all of Ian Somerhalder's flaws? Like not flaws, but like why are we dragging Ian Somerhalder like this?
we can. It's okay. We can bully rich men. That's okay. I think we can do it.
Yeah, yeah, I
Uh,
think it's fine.
yeah.
He's an acceptable target, I guess.
Yep. It's fine. Okay. Yeah, I think that pretty core to how we decide to write Damon is to have him being intentionally convincing people without compulsion that they should be vampires, and that this is a part of a cycle that he has in play to really drive home to Stefan that it's that most people would choose to be vampires, and that Stefan moping around is fucking ridiculous. However, I think in the show, Stefan forces Damon to turn because Catherine is gone and Damon doesn't want to complete the transition.
Hmm.
I think that if we switch that around, it makes things make a bit more sense. I feel like the show intentionally used that as a bit of a surprise, and it worked okay in that context. But I think for our purposes, having Damon force Stefan to turn because he wants Stefan to live with him like as a vampire, and he wants good things for Stefan, and having Stefan turn around and just absolutely hate Damon for doing that, I think that introduces Damon's intentions a little bit better. Do you agree? Do you feel strongly either way about how that went down?
I think that the way it went down originally was pretty interesting. Like, I like the idea of Damon being the reluctant one and that subverting
Mm,
in the like hundreds of years that they've been alive. I think that would have been enough time for them to have like a change of heart, so to speak.
mm,
But I do agree with the idea that Damon should like challenge Stefan's philosophy of becoming a vampire being the worst possible thing that could happen to you, worse than death. I like the idea of him constantly trying to prove that that's not the case. That's like
mm,
there are good things to happen when becoming a vampire, and that I guess it's the idea that Stefan truly believes that like in the best of people. So
mm,
he would rather think that people wouldn't choose to become something that's like monstrous or that requires hurting people in order to survive.
mm,
Whereas Damon believes is a bit more cynical, so he believes that it's human nature to uh, hurt others in order to survive. I guess that people inevitably do that. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. But I'm thinking about what you're saying. Like if that initial uh, transition, like that initial moment, was changed,
mm,
how would that change them in the long run? Like how would that affect how they are in the modern day?
mm.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, I definitely remember when I watched the show feeling like it was cool that Stefan forced Damon to turn because it was just such an inversion of how their relationship had been up until that point in as it was shown in the modern time. I guess I'm just trying
Hmm.
to like track the like the continuity for Damon from not wanting to be a vampire because he loved Catherine so much and he thinks she's dead, to liking it so much and really feeling like Stefan needs to understand that people like to be vampires. Like, I feel like maybe if we tweak a little bit what we have proposed about, if we keep the original dynamic, the original, like how the turning happened originally, and Damon turns people to make Stefan angry because Stefan thinks that people shouldn't, like Stefan values humanity and thinks that people will in general shouldn't become vampires. Like he doesn't think that everybody should be a vampire, doesn't think that everybody would do well being a vampire, doesn't want to be one himself really. And if
Hmm.
Damon does it intentionally to punish Stefan for forcing him to turn, that might make a bit more sense as a reason for his behavior, because I think otherwise we need to introduce something else that has changed Damon completely and switched the dynamic from Damon trying to prove to Stefan that people would become vampires all the time. Like, I personally think that Damon is correct in that proposal because it's correct for me. I would
Hmm.
personally.
Hmm.
But like, if even if it just starts out in the beginning of the first season as Damon trying to prove to Stefan that it was a mistake to turn him, because now he's going to turn all of these people and be incredibly inconvenient. And what is it he says, 1,000 years of misery or a lifetime of misery, he promises, and that's like aligned with that. I just think that we need to tie um, Damon's treatment of people. I think that we probably shouldn't just have this dynamic between him and women. I think that's not necessarily helping us to move away from what we're wanting to move away from. But the way that he turns people and convinces them to become vampires should be tied to that moment, because that's like such a big one in. So there's like such a big, I guess, tentpole of the story in
Hmm.
the original show. And so if we use that still, then then Damon's characterization in the present should be tied to that in a way that like can be obvious. Yeah, I guess. But like what you said about Damon wanting to prove to Stefan that it can be good and like healthy and okay to be a vampire. I think that it would be nice if, as the brothers reconciled, if that became a part of what Damon is trying to convince him, because that's become a part of what Damon now believes because he's moved
Hmm.
on from the bitterness over Catherine. And you can still have Damon having this dynamic with human beings and trying to convince them that there is more power and more ability out there for them, but also in a way that's not opposed directly to Stefan. Like, he's trying to help Stefan understand. Like, does that make sense? Like, we can like pull it around to that if it's not that at first.
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. Like they eventually find that middle ground, right? Stefan isn't as filled with self-loathing, and like he recognizes that vampires aren't all monstrous, and that human beings, as they become vampires, like their worst tendencies come out. He realizes that that's not true, but at the same time, Damon realizes that this conflict with Stefan isn't really doing anything for them. So it would be interesting for their philosophies to sort of meet in the middle, and that is a way that eventually leads to their reconciliation. I think
Mm.
that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think it would be cool. I feel like we've been talking about both Stefan and Damon, but did you have anything else that you wanted to say about Damon specifically?
One of the things that like I really disliked about watching TVD was that Damon wrongs so many characters in like pretty major ways. Like for some of these characters, it's their entire initial motivation is to get back at Damon in some way. So like that was true for Alaric because of Isabel. That was true for Enzo for leaving him behind with the Augustinian vampires, like the fire, whatever. Um,
Mm.
and sort of true for Caroline. Like she had other motivations for that, but Damon does wrong Caroline in a pretty major way in the beginning of the show. But he's so easily forgiven, and like those characters end up being his strongest relationships, like his strongest friendships, because I think that the writers were afraid of Damon being perceived as unlikable. Like for him to have any tangible consequences for his actions would force people to consider those actions and think, oh, holy shit, that was pretty fucked up. Would I have forgiven this person
Mm.
if I were in the same place? So I think that it'd be cool to have like more conflict there. It'd be cool to have seen a main character or a recurring character just despise Damon and just not change from that mentality at all. Like maybe he
Mm.
tolerates him
And be correct.
for like they'd be correct. Maybe tolerate him for Stefan's sake or for Elena's sake or whatever, but um, to not have that like friendship, it's so weird. It's so weird that like by the end of the series, Caroline and Damon are just like embracing and hugging. If I were in Caroline's shoes, I would not have done that. So it'd be cool to have like just a character who fucking hates
Mm.
Damon, just like to be my insert. My author
Yep.
insert is the character who fucking despises Damon.
I think that if we have shifted his motivation around to um, having people willingly turn into vampires, it would probably, like just by proxy, make Caroline quite unlikable to be angry for like about Damon, like to be angry at Damon for the situation between the two
Mm-hmm.
of them if none of it's been non-consensual and she decided to turn. But I think that Matt being angry at Damon forever, permanently, full stop, because Damon turned Vicky, and that means that Vicky either
Mm-hmm.
dies, or I don't know if we'll still have her die, but if she leaves or there's an issue and Matt no longer has Vicky as a support, I think him hating Damon, like period, end of sentence, like that would would work quite well. Like, did you have a specific character in mind for like how you? I know you mentioned Caroline, but like, did you have like a certain person in mind, or like was it Caroline?
I was definitely thinking of Matt because um,
You're
he's
always
not
thinking of
allowed to have
Matt.
that conflict with Damon. Yeah, I'm always thinking of Matt. But I would have liked to see Matt more as a threat to Damon. Like
Mm.
there's this like subplot in season 6 where Matt, for some reason I don't remember why, is like super angry at Stefan, and Stefan has done nothing wrong ever in his life.
Mm.
And I just feel like he could have directed like all that anger and all that hatred and all that vitriol towards Damon, but in a way where he would have been more of a threat because like Matt has no powers. He stays human throughout the show. I think that's a cool thing to maintain. Like I like the idea of a character, despite all this adversity, remaining human by the end. But he's like not allowed to hate Damon as much as he deserves. So I definitely
Mm.
think of Matt. I think a little bit of Enzo as well. I think that Enzo forgave Damon like way too quickly. And it could have been like an interesting dynamic between the two of them. Like, hey, we both hate Damon Salvatore. We should do something about that. Hell yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be an interesting subplot. I'd watch that subplot. I think that'd be really cool.
yeah. I think that would be cool. We could also I mean, now we're just talking about Matt, which it would also be
When are we not talking about Matt?
yeah, the unholy trinity and Matt Donovan. I think we could also bring up, because eventually, before he becomes a cop, which I think was not necessarily the best development for him, he does have.
It was a choice. It was definitely a choice.
He does join I think they call themselves the Neighborhood Watch or something. It's just, it really parallels those like weird groups in America that are like super militant about their behaviors and protecting their community from undesirables, and usually ends up being quite an ugly situation. But he eventually joins, and they're all like about vampire hunting, I think, is the idea. I forget which season this is in. I think it's during Kai, because the barrier is down, keeping supernatural things out of the town, because the guy that's like leading the group is able to drive a vampire. I think it might even be Stefan's girlfriend at the time, drives her like over the town line, and she dies in the back of the truck or something, because like there's no magic and she's a vampire, and she like is dying again. But yeah, it happens all the way up there. And it makes sense because at that point, Matt is old enough to be accepted to join that kind of program. But if we have aged them all up into like college, then that could probably happen now, if we wanted to. If like Matt finding out about vampires then makes him more of a threat, because he then understands, oh my god, we can get rid of Alaric. We can just have Matt learn how to kill vampires.
We could get rid of Alaric. Yes, absolutely.
Oh my god.
That's the... Yes, finally we found out a way to get rid of Alaric. Absolutely.
Also,
oh, glorious. That's wonderful.
We definitely haven't talked about this on the podcast, but we have discussed it for a couple hours privately amongst ourselves. Damon being a theatre kid, and if he was a part of the faculty,
absolutely,
I think that it would be fun to give Damon something else to do with himself. And also, if Matt is undecided but is kind of looking at, like, has this desire to maybe join a production or something like that, and then Matt is in a position to like out Damon as a vampire in a situation that Damon actually cares about quite a lot, and like we can treat it as it's super ironic until it becomes obvious that Damon actually really does care about being a part of that, because it's like his only interest outside of, you know, turning people into vampires. Like, I think that making Matt a threat in a totally different way, that's not just like physically, that could be interesting if they have some crossover there. Yeah, but I think that I will have to work really hard to not interpret them fighting in like the theater club as like romantic potential
on stage. That'd be cool. Oh my goodness, yeah. Because we already have like the vampire hunter character who is Jeremy, so like to have Matt go through the same role would be, I don't know, kind of repetitive. But the idea of him like sort of on the sidelines, with these machinations of how to out Damon and how to get to Damon on a more personal level, I think would be super cool. And this idea that like Damon actually cares about his students and actually cares about his job, and that being the thing that kind of like is the limit for him. Like, no, he absolutely does not want to lose this. I think that would definitely...
Not this Hamlet production.
Not this No, please, I have to finish this Hamlet production. That gives the opportunity for Ian Somerhalder to just go ham, to like open his eyes as wide as he can, for his eyebrows to do the thing that he does. Like, absolutely go off, King.
He directs with his eyebrows. He just sits in the front row, just communicating exclusively with eyebrows, and they're all scared of him.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'd be so cool. That's why he is the way he is because he was a theater kid.
It's just too dynamic. He's obviously about to break into song at any moment. It would also be, this might come too close to making Damon like an out and out good person, but it would be interesting if he like refused to try and turn any of his students. Like, so it's not even that he's brought vampire type activities and behaviors into like what is now his job and what he's now doing with his life. Like, I think that it doesn't necessarily work to step right into this from the first episode, but maybe after he discovers that that Catherine is alive and doesn't want him trying to find something else for himself, and then joining the staff, and then like having a different role. I think turns things upside down in an interesting way and then would immediately put Matt in a position to really fuck with him. But we also need a competing reason why he can't just kill Matt. Like, either he's reached a point with Stefan and Elena where he won't hurt somebody that's close to them,
Mm-hmm.
or like why wouldn't he? Or oh, I guess if he's already turned Vicky and he, like, I guess kind of cares about her or something, like maybe he wouldn't. I don't know. We just like would need to think about, like, how far can Matt go and how can he have this audacity with somebody that could snap his neck like right away.
Yeah, we'll think about more of that in like the Matt centric episode. Not that we're thinking of having like an entire episode dedicated to Matt, which I could totally talk about Matt
Well,
for
we've
like
already had this
a full
one.
hour, but like we'll save that for another episode.
Okay. Did you have anything else that you wanted to pitch for Damon?
No, for Damon, I am good. Now let's talk about someone that we've talked about extensively already. But Stefan, what ideas do you have for Stefan? First of all, what do you think of Stefan in TVD in the original series?
I kind of liked him, I guess. I was obviously a Damon girl to start with. But I mean, we can all grow. Um,
We all grow as people. We evolved.
yeah, exactly. I think when I return to it now, I find Stefan much more appealing. I think that he is. Yeah, I mean, if I had to choose as they are in the show, I would choose Stefan
Hmm.
for just obvious reasons, much less gross, but also really goes out of his way for other people, even when he doesn't know them and doesn't have a reason for like a personal impact related to their well-being. I think that I don't love the soulmate plotline.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, I don't really love Elena and Damon being together, but I appreciate that they subverted that plotline eventually. Like, they just didn't like really gun for it. Like, Elena could step away from that. Like I say, like, we have this entire history with all our doppelgangers, and Elena could still say no.
Hmm.
Um, I liked that aspect, but I, yeah, it just I don't really enjoy. I think that it just carried the doppelganger thing a bit too far, and like, just Stefan was such a I guess a slave to it.
Hmm.
Like, he personally never said no to it, and so Stefan related to that plotline I don't really enjoy because he doesn't have a chance to turn away from it. And maybe this is my current bias coming from reading the book, because he avoids Elena a lot at first and is like actively trying to avoid being in a relationship with her. And I think that the insta love, being all in, and then finding out your soulmates, and that he never really raises a flag at any point and decides that it's not for him. Um, yeah, it bothers me a little. I think that introducing him to Elena more organically would be nice. Like, if he was at at the college for reasons other than just her being there. Like, if they met
Hmm.
in a class together, like, I mean, we still need to justify why he's all of a sudden conveniently in proximity to Catherine's doppelganger. Um, but I just feel like so much of it is, I don't know, contrived to lead to this ultimate soulmate thing, and then Stefan is left hanging because Elena, interestingly, chooses not him. But yeah, I don't love it. What about you? What did you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think it kind of cheapened their relationship because they really tried to make it seem like uh, Stefan's relationship with Catherine didn't really affect Stefan's relationship with Elena, like beyond that initial attraction because they're similar in appearance. They tried to paint it as like, no, Stefan loves Elena for who Elena is, but then leaning way too hard into the soulmate angle between like Silas and Catherine and their entire like millennia old history together um, was a little too much, and I would have preferred because I wasn't much of a fan of Elena and Damon getting together, but I think that I would have preferred Elena and Stefan kind of like slow things down and had a little bit more time to develop their relationship.
Mm,
So I like that will they, won't they kind of thing. If it's too much, then obviously it gets a little bit annoying. But
mm.
it was too fast in the show. Like, I
Mm,
would have preferred to see it a bit
yeah.
slower.
What would be nice is if Stefan started out, if it was intentional, him, like he sees Elena, he realizes that she looks exactly like Catherine, and he, for a long time, suspects that she still is. That might add a level of interest.
Hmm.
So you can still have that like instant connection, maybe from Elena's perspective, where all of a sudden there's this guy in her life and he's there all the time. But for Stefan, it's like having to make sure that this person is not Catherine, and having to make sure that Catherine really is dead, because he feels a very
Hmm.
specific way about Catherine and needs her to be dead. Because I mean, it would make it, I mean, it's not completely unreasonable to interpret Stefan becoming a vampire and suddenly remembering everything from the Catherine era and all that she compelled him about, to interpret that as trauma. So I think that if we
Hmm.
put them secretly at odds, even if through Elena's perspective, it's, oh, well, there's this nice guy in my creative writing class, or there's something interesting happening here with this person. And for him, he's like, if this is fucking Catherine, I'm going to kill her. I don't care if I'm a good person. I'm going to like throw her off a cliff and I'm going to set her on fire. Like, but
Hmm.
still trying to make absolutely certain, because he can't justify hurting somebody just because they look like Catherine. And if we really lean into the fact that it's hard for him to love her because of Catherine, like not just this whole distance thing that you mentioned, like, oh yeah, like you're completely different from Catherine and you've got nothing to do with her. If we really, I mean, I guess we've then brought together and like highlighted deep trauma in two people that then either end up together for good or end up together for a while. I think that it works a little better for me personally.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, Not only the idea of like personal trauma that Catherine inflicted on Stefan, but there is the idea that Catherine is a threat to uh, people in general. So if
Hmm.
Stefan is protective of humanity, I would say that it would be in character for him to want to go after Catherine or this person who looks like Catherine, because she would definitely disrupt the peace of like Mystic Falls or the college that they're currently at. So I think there's this part of
Hmm.
Stefan that wants to overcome his trauma and seek revenge against it, but there's also this part
Hmm.
that's very protective of humanity
Yeah.
and doesn't want Catherine to uh, repeat the things that she did in the past.
Yeah. I think other than the town, the one other thing that Stefan could realistically imagine that Catherine would be back for is Bonnie, because that's the Bennett
Hmm.
connection. And if we maintain that,
Hmm.
and I mean, I would personally prefer to tweak it majorly. And I believe that you feel the same way, just because of the pretty gross parallels between how Bonnie is treated by the narrative
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
present,
Hmm.
and then Emily being the handmaiden or whatever. But if Stefan is concerned specifically about Bonnie, I think that would make it really interesting. And if he's, because like imagine some guy shows up and suddenly he's like there every time you're hanging out with your best friend, and like, yeah, he'll
Hmm.
go out with you, but he's like there every single time you go to her house, every time you stop by anywhere, and he's like, you don't really understand what's happening because he just seems to be obsessed with your relationship with your best friend. Like, I think that
Hmm.
it shows somebody caring about Bonnie as well, and like wanting to protect her. And it's not because she can save the world or she can do something specific for them, but he's just like not going to let it happen again, not going to let Catherine just show up in a town and do whatever she wants. Like, it
Hmm.
like makes that interesting. And I guess the moment that Bonnie realizes that Stefan was there to like showed up in town and this whole thing has happened because he was like, no, that like that's not happening, no way. I feel like that would then bring them closer to being friends, and it's not just about them being in proximity to each other via Elena. It's like specific decisions that they've made that kind of improves that friendship. I think would be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I think that the show would definitely benefit from developing the characters' relationships with each other in a way that doesn't really focus on the relationships between Damon, Stefan, and Elena. So for Stefan to
Mm.
develop this friendship with Bonnie as something outside of Elena would be something definitely really, really cool to see.
Did you have anything else for Stefan?
Well, you started talking about some gross shit and the whole handmaiden situation, and I think that we can't really talk about Damon or Stefan and what we would change without talking about their backstory. because
Mm-hmm.
it reflects a very specific context that they decided to go with because of the historical context that they want to associate with the town. So the Civil War, the Confederacy, all that
Mm.
jazz. So the idea is, the question is, do we keep Stefan and Damon as two people who were alive during the Civil War and like who were human during the Civil War
Mm.
in the South, in the southern United States specifically, or do we want to change that? Because in the books, they were from Italy, like
Mm.
Renaissance Italy, and I
Yeah.
think that would be preferable, but also very difficult to incorporate. Like, how did they get from Italy to Mystic Falls, and how does that their past relate to the present? I guess.
I think that, I mean, we there are two roads diverging in the wood. Either we demonstrate very clearly that there were specific reasons for the decisions that they made, for Damon not being a Confederate soldier, for Stefan not going along eventually, and that they had issues and maybe they were dissenters. Or, yeah, you're right, like we just return it to Italy. And we could even do a like, like sister city and sister town things. We could do that between Mystic Falls and wherever in
Mm-hmm.
Italy they're
Yeah, yeah,
from. And
definitely.
if there was some kind of exchange thing
Mm-hmm.
happening, not necessarily back in 1863 or whatever, but if there was in the present some kind of exchange happening that involved, like, it's not unreasonable to expect that they might send historical artifacts to one another to see, like, this is the history of our town, and this is the history of your town. If something specific came from Italy to Mystic Falls, and then Stefan goes from Italy, well, he doesn't have to be in Italy, but goes, oh, well, that's going there, I'm going there because this is important for some plot relevant reason, then this could, I have no idea what it would be, but if we just used something to link it and like carry it over, that might work with having them still have this issue with Catherine, but in Italy, like in the books, they still have this problem, and she's buried there, I guess, or like thought to be in a tomb there, and she's like all of that happened back then. Then we can twist it around a bit. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that sounds really cool. I would have to, because I haven't read the books, so I'm very curious as to how they managed to resolve that situation. I'm thinking of like the other scenario where we keep their show backstory, but openly question it and criticize it. Um, there's the fact that I think that the show never really acknowledges like, if we have two characters who were morally opposed to slavery and the Confederacy, and who one of them was a deserter of the Confederate Army, to live in the modern era in a town that glorifies this history, I think that would be like an interesting conflict
Mm,
to set up between them, because like what would they think, they
mm,
having lived during the Civil War, to watch like the Civil War reenactments in
mm,
Mystic Falls, of which there are several, and
mm.
like that's super
Yeah.
weird. So I think that that could be like a way for us to introduce this idea that the town sort of reckoning with its own history
Mm,
and
yeah.
dealing with those difficult questions.
I like the idea of the brothers as a direct opposition to the argument that, oh, well, we're not celebrating the racism and we're not celebrating all of this. We're celebrating the people who lived at the time, and they just believed the things that people believed in that time. Also, I guess it helps us as we say, like, well, Bonnie should be able to say that something's wrong. That then means that Bonnie is never going to be the only voice in the room or the one person that's checking the box of, oh, yeah, we've said that this might be a little bit racist. Like, obviously, it's there and like it's unavoidable.
Definitely, like to not just have her be like the token voice of reason, to have this other perspective
Mm,
that ends up agreeing with her and like amplifying her voice, so to speak, because I think that she would be
mm,
she would have the most to say about this, but her voice would deserve to be amplified by other characters.
mm.
I think that this
Yeah.
is a question that we could ask our listeners. Like,
Yeah.
which alternative do you prefer? Do you prefer keeping the backstory but actively criticizing it and calling attention to it, or scrapping the backstory and trying to have this other connection with Renaissance Italy, which is a very interesting context, like that I think that would be explored in fascinating ways on the show. So, yeah.
That's probably a good thought to end on, unless you had something else.
Nope, that's it for me.
Yeah, so if you have any thoughts on that question, but anything else, any new pitches, next week we'll obviously be talking more about character. So we'll be continuing this conversation then. You can email us at therevampiredairies@gmail.com. That's the Revampire Diaries. So it's kind of like their Vampire Diaries, but it's not, I promise.
Before we end this episode, I just want to suggest one tiny little thing that I think would make the show like so much better.
Okay, as long as it doesn't take too long.
I just think that the show should have dragons. Hear me out. Like, we have every single supernatural creature under the sun. We have vampires, we have witches, we have werewolves, we have like combinations between those. We have
Mm-hmm.
sirens, we have travelers. I
Mm-hmm.
think that the show would definitely benefit from like a huge, massive threat that everyone could like get together and
Yep.
combat. Or
Okay.
have a pet dragon, like dragons in general. Dragons, I think that'd be super cool.
Okay, how about we talk about it next week? Thanks for hanging out, Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Flo. It was a great